The X-Men are some of my most favorite comic book series, but like all things that last longer than they should, they are full of shit, and before the 80s they were mostly unbearable. I will go over them for telling you why, starting with the first issue in 1963. You know you're into some terrible crap when the cover is this bad. By the way, those who say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, they are talking about books before the 20th century, when covers didn't have an image on them, or when they did it was some random gravure they found and used it for the heck of it. Comics don't function like that, they are designed to attract you with their cover. And this cover is awful, so it's not doing its job and damages a new franchise. It would be the same as a very bad first episode of a new TV series. For most people, first impressions are everything and they don't care if something gets better. After 25 years, they are going to drop it just because they don't like the first things they see. Now let's get into the specifics. One of the lamest things all comics were doing was using over-the-top words for exciting you without having to show it. Meaning it's supposed to be important because we tell you it's important and not because you can see it's important. Thus they come off as pretentious and are no different than what the hype morons are doing today when they say it's unlike anything we've seen before and it subverts your expectations. It's also interesting to see how some of these words change their indirect meaning over the decades. For example, nobody would use the word sensational, as you see on the left, because nowadays we have associated the word with sensationalism, which is the same as a shallow entertainment. Two more words you see, such as strangest and fabulous, are words that came to be associated with queers and became one of the prime reasons the X-Men were seen as a metaphor for being gay during the 60s. Nobody would use those words today if the characters weren't openly gay or trans. And by the way, almost everyone is nowadays. Being indirect about it like in the 60s doesn't prevent straight people from reading those comics. Openly being about that is bound to drive away a big portion of the straight audience. People like the X-Men because they had cool superpowers, not because they were identifying as pansexual hippopotami or some crap like that. But anyways, this isn't an issue yet. Even Iceman was plain fabulous. He wasn't yet fabulous. Now let's move to that text down and to the left. You don't start a new series by having the heroes fighting the alleged most powerful supervillain. You make it sound like there is nothing left for later on, which is why Magneto was quickly nerfed into being not that powerful, so that every challenge will be feeling equally threatening. Once again, the wording is bad because it doesn't build any expectations for later, and it even makes you feel cheated when you find out he's not the strongest supervillain in the world. It's done for the sake of overbearing sensationalism, and it's why a lot of people came to hate franchises and their fandoms. They are being treated like idiots, and then are mocked by the supposed fans for pointing out the bullshit. And now the biggest problem with the cover, the actual artwork. If you're supposed to be interested in the X-Men by what they are doing, this ain't working. What kind of lame poses are these? The only thing Angel is doing is hovering and holding a metallic column or something. Aside from how he's not using such weapons, therefore the cover is misleading. How are you supposed to find this guy's power is interesting? He just flies, he doesn't do anything with them? It's even worse with Beast. What is he doing? Is he entertaining Magneto by acting like a circus performer? What is Iceman doing? Playing with Magneto by throwing snowballs? Is that his power, playing with snowballs? How fabulous! And what can one say about Marvel Girl, standing in the back and doing absolutely nothing? Talk about the strangest superhero of them all. Doing nothing. Frankly, the only ones who do something in the cover are Cyclops attacking and Magneto deflecting. Those two were more than enough, the others could have been removed entirely. But no, it was the first issue, so they all had to be on it, even if they discredit what they are supposed to be promoting. Look at all these useless people taking up space and doing nothing to win the reader. They don't even leave any room for a background. It's like they are fighting in an empty room or something. And yes, backgrounds are just pretty colors, but they give context to the fight, such as where they are fighting and for what reason. If it's empty like that, it makes you think they are fighting for no reason. And yes, if you read the actual comic, there is a location and a reason, and both are cool, but you don't get that in the cover, and thus you are given no reason to bother finding out. Instead of a cool scenery, they overstuff the image with lame characters and sensationalist words that tell you it's cool instead of showing you why it's cool. And in case some of you think I am expecting too much out of 60s comics, here are the covers of the first Spider-Man issue and the first Fantastic Four issue. Look how infinitely better they are. Spider-Man is flying and there are buildings with different perspective in the background. You know what his powers are and there is motion and a bit of dynamic cinematography. Look at the Fantastic Four fighting a monster in a city while displaying a bit of their powers. There is more context regarding what is going on. Obviously the speech bubbles are too much since they are telling you what they are doing instead of showing it, but even with that they are vastly superior to the X-Men cover and one of the many reasons they were doing much better popularity-wise. Next time I will talk about the first page. Oh yes, I am milking the crap out of this, and you all have to suffer through it as I did many years ago. For the time being, if you want some message or points regarding the reason I made this video, here they are. It's about promoting good writing, which this cover didn't have. More terrible 60s X-Men in the next video. Same channel, same boomer attitude. Excelsior! And now it's time to talk about the first page and the importance of establishing shots. Whenever something appears for the first time, it helps a lot if you present it big and detailed, so that the reader can have a good idea of what it's about. It's the same as describing a character or a location in a book during their introduction. This comic doesn't do that, and as a result the reader has a hard time giving a shit. You get that right in the first panel. They mention an academy, but we don't see an academy, so we are giving no idea how it looks like, how big it is, and most importantly, how rich is the guy who owns it, and what kind of technology he is using. And yes, that's important, because Xavier has a freaking military training base down there. The second establishing shot is about the introduction of the heroes, and although it exists, it has the same issue as the cover. The text is trying to excite you with fancy words, but their poses are lame. You're given no reason to care about them. Angel just flies. Beast just appears on a window. Cyclops is not even doing anything, he's just walking, because what could he do to display his power? Fire his eye beam for no reason? And the most hilarious part of them all is Iceman, who is pole dancing, as if he's training for the gay bar he's gonna be working at. And now let's move to the second page. Yes, you fell for my trick by assuming it's going to be one page per video. I am controlling you as easily as Xavier is controlling the X-Men with his mind. Because that's what the second page is about. A display of his power and his absolute control over the heroes. If that sounds authoritarian and completely evil, you would be correct. The mentor of the heroes stands still and commands their every move without having to say a word. Imagine the kids reading this shit, they would be freaking out. At worst, they would assume he's the bad guy, and the X-Men are his henchmen. I mean, look how similarly they dress in a bland-looking uniform that makes them seem like foot soldiers in some evil organization. At best, they would assume he's the protagonist, since the rest come off as his mindless puppets. It's not true either way, which builds false expectations. The next few pages can be summed up as the heroes training and displaying their powers. Narrative-wise, these pages serve a purpose, which is to show what they are capable of and even what their personality is like. Over here, for example, we see Iceman joking and then showing off what he can do with his superpower. At least it's not pole dancing in a gay bar. Entertainment-wise though, these pages are boring, since there is nothing actually going on. It's like the plot freezes for the sake of an info dump. Samurai 8 says hi. They could have shown all that during a fight when there would be tension and stakes. As is the case with any training session, most people don't care about it and would rather skip it so the real fun can begin. Which is exactly what I'm going to do. Skipping. Then Marvel Girl comes to join the X-Men and we get a boring exposition scene about her telekinetic powers and the purpose of the X-Men in trying to protect the world from evil mutants. Again, narrative-wise, this is important for letting the reader understand what is going on. Entertainment-wise, it's boring because it's just two people sitting down and talking. And if you thought the writers have learned from those mistakes after all these decades, look at what every light novel and modern shonen is doing right now. And now we reach the worst part of the entire issue. Yes, even worse than gay Iceman's pole dancing. As if having a girl in an incel-oriented action comic isn't enough of an insult. Everyone is simping for her. Well, not Iceman, because he's gay. And it's not like I don't get why hormone-filled men would want to have sex with a beautiful girl, that's normal. The problem is that she exists so the men will simp for her, and thus the comic artists can keep hammering the fact that the heroes are not gay. Because in the 60s there was this nutcase professor who insisted action comics like Batman make you gay. Look at this man in his skin-tight suit being friendly with Robin, a boy who is also in a skin-tight suit. Without a woman in their lives, they will obviously become gay, which is why moral committees demanded from comic artists to include women in their stories, otherwise they would sue them for having gay superheroes, which is the exact opposite of what Twitter is doing nowadays, when a comic doesn't have gay superheroes. Think of the children, damn it, they must not become gay by reading comics. And thus, a lot of girls were thrown in comics for the sole purpose of the men simping for them instead of each other, because it was important for making sure none of the X-Men would ever be proven to be gay. None of them. And now we can move to less cringy stuff, such as the introduction of Magneto. Remember what I said about establishing shots? Well, this is the first time we see him and it's just tiny panels. Isn't he supposed to be the most powerful of all supervillains? He should have gotten a full page, just so we can see his whole body as well as his magnetic powers. But then again, if the artists did that, they would force a lot of boys to turn gay because of a man in a skin suit. Iceman's gay pole dancing gets a pass on a big panel. The most powerful supervillain in the world gets this shit. That aside, Magneto is expositioning his evil plan by talking to thin air. There is nobody around, he's just saying what he plans to do as a lazy way for the reader to know what is going on. It would be so much better if he was thinking what he plans to do, which in comic book terms it only means the speech bubbles would look like a cloud coming out of his mind, but no, we get this lazy shit. It was more important to get 3 pages of everyone simping over Marvel Girl than giving Magneto a full page and a few thought bubbles. And that is for the second video. I covered half of an issue this time. I am speeding up. These are the points I made in case you skipped everything, which you probably did since you don't watch my analytical videos. And then you complain about me not making analytical videos. See you next time when I go over the other half of the issue. Enough said. The second half begins with the heroes being lazy peeping toms and watching the only girl in the academy as she's changing clothes. That's the kind of shit you would expect in a bottom-of-the-barrel ecchi manga, yet here it is in X-Men. Our heroes, people. And it was approved by the moral committees of that time because this way they prove they are not gay. Being a creep who treats women as sex objects is fine. Being gay is not. Meanwhile, Magneto displays his powers by taking control of military weapons and causing trouble. This is followed by him demanding to be given a military base, which doesn't make any sense. He can control any weapon without having to be near it, so why does he need the base? He can do whatever he wants even without it. The answer is because we need the bad guy to be in a specific place so the heroes can find him. It's basically plot-induced stupidity. If Magneto uses his powers properly, he doesn't need to reveal himself in a base. That way the heroes would need to use their detective skills, which they do not possess. And this is a dumb comic to begin with. So the next best thing is this bullshit that makes Magneto to come off as a moron. Anyways, the good guys find about it and spring to action very slowly. First they need to drive all the way to the airport, and then they need to board a plane, a procedure that can take hours depending on traffic. Imagine the heroes failing to save the day because they had to drive during rush hour. Obviously this was fixed in later issues by having a super advanced jet inside the academy that is always ready to fly wherever they want. It saved them from a lot of time, although it required from Xavier to be super rich and in possession of technology that surpasses the USA military despite not having any ties with the military. Holy shit, even Tony Stark had ties for excusing his weaponry. Over here it exists for the sake of the heroes traveling whenever the plot wants them to be in a few minutes, with infinite money and futuristic technology. Another plot-induced stupidity moment is when the X-Men are allowed to enter the base which Magneto took over. What kind of a military officer would allow unknown individuals to enter a large missile silo without clearance from the Pentagon? Especially when said individuals hide their identities and treat his soldiers like playthings. Holy crap, look at the X-Men treating normal people like ants, and the way they dress makes makes them seem like Magneto's henchmen, not his enemies. Why would anyone trust these people? It's another plot convenience you have to accept. The heroes need to be able to enter places they normally can't, so instant power of friendship it is. Can you imagine a bunch of supervillains wanting to enter a military base by using this excuse? They could take control of nuclear warheads without having to steal them or fight for them or sneak in to get them. In the next pages, the heroes disable the missiles by using their individual talents. It was an okay display of what they can do, and yet another proof for why we didn't need that training session in the first half. It was a waste of time if they could show all that in action. Then came the showdown with Magneto, and it was super lame. He wasn't even injured by the I-beam and he ran away in a few seconds. He didn't even put up a fight. What kind of a showdown was that? If this is the most powerful supervillain in the world, imagine how lamer the rest of them will be. Why would anyone want to read another issue of this bullshit? And you know what? I'm pretty sure the fight was so short because the comic artist got to the page limit, didn't want to throw in a cliffhanger and continue the fight in the next issue. If only he hadn't wasted so many pages in useless training sessions and sleazy men simping and peeping, he would still have plenty of room for a long fight. But no, it was more important to keep showing the men not being gay than to have action. In an action comic. Then we have a third plot-induced stupidity moment when the military officer is not arresting the heroes for questioning. I mean, a bunch of costume freaks with superpowers just caused millions of dollars of damage in his base, and he made the US military to seem incompetent. The least he could have done was detaining them for a few days, so he will have someone to point fingers at when the president asks him why was he unable to detain a bunch of cosplayers. Now, if you know the basics of X-Men, you are aware of the racism theme that is constantly appearing. There is no such thing happening here because they hadn't thought of it yet. And as a result, the story is shallow. Yes, X-Men, you're free to go back to your homes. It's not like there are repercussions for mutants using vile means that can topple whole countries and are never accountable for their actions. Why would anyone be worried about that? The final panel is almost like a culmination of everything that is wrong with this issue, starting with the bottom text that tries to convince you it was the most unusual tale in the annals of modern magazines. 2 seconds of Magneto running away like a coward, and then it prompts you to check out the next issue, as if it ever offered something worth continuing. If it ended with a cliffhanger, there would be some incentive to read further, but as it stands, it's all bullshit, and the narrator is trying to hype you with nothing. Exactly what modern sellouts are doing with crappy shonen. Then Xavier is telling them they justified everything they went through. What is he talking about? They hide their identity. They don't have the approval of the state. They trash the military base without accountability. What are these vigilantes justifying here? How do they differ from a Twitter mob that slanders and shuts down anyone they don't like under the excuse of their feelings or whatever political agendas they have? And to top it all off, Xavier commands the X-Men to return to him. How is he not a supervillain? He is a huge head in the sky who controls them like puppets. For all we know, he mind-controlled the military officer to let them go. Maybe he was controlling Magneto's actions as well, all for promoting his evil plans. Who's the real greatest supervillain, But hey, look on the bright side. At least the heroes are not gay. As long as they have an objectified woman to simp for, there is no problem.
Honey, where'd you go when you went out last night?
Just over to Tom's house. Played some poker, had some brewskis, you know.
Really?
The second issue attempts to subvert your expectations by openly telling you in the cover that the X-Men lost. Oh my god, how can it be when they defeated the most powerful supervillain? Is this Vanisher even more powerful? The answer is he isn't, he's hardly street level, but they had to hype him up somehow, so the idiots will be curious enough to buy the comic. Also, just like the first cover had Angel holding a weapon that doesn't exist, over here we are lied to about their defeat since they didn't actually lose, and the Vanisher is not unbeatable as the text implies. It's more false expectations for fooling you into buying the comic. Like saying Deku breaks the mold of boys don't cry in My Hero Academia. Go buy this subversion of anime that has never been done before. Moving along to the artwork of the cover, it is so much better than the first. It now has a background and it's the White House of all places. It gives context to the fight and hypes you up to find out what are they doing there. With that said, the X-Men have no relevance in it since they are just standing still doing absolutely nothing. Only the Vanisher is important and only he should have been shown threatening the White House or something. And once again we see how much of an evil mastermind Xavier is by commanding the X-Men to do absolutely nothing. Why should anyone care about the heroes of this comic when they are permanently acting like mindless puppets? Congratulations, you're about to read the tale you will never forget. Not for the reasons you think, Stan. The X-Men are summoned by their supreme overlord, Professor X, and like the puppets they are, they rush to him. Along the way, Angel is proven to be quite handsome, a quality that doesn't go away even while wearing a mask. His aura of charisma is off the roof and every woman becomes horny just by seeing him. Remember, this exists only for reminding us these people are not gay. None of them can be gay if women love them, but as it happens in every crappy harem, there is always a cock block, so the story won't become a hentai. Marvel Girl becomes low-key yandere and kicks away the competition. How heroic of her, treating defenseless women like that. How are heroes, people? When they are not puppets of a criminal mastermind, they mistreat the innocent. She sends them inside the cinema and tells them to find all the romance they want in fiction. What a great message we are getting from the X-Men. Reality sucks, just escape in some isekai and love to the people all you like. Meanwhile, Marvel Girl gets exactly what she didn't want other women to have because she has superpowers. What a great message about mutants coexisting with humans. We are all equal, but those with superpowers are more equal than the rest of these pathetic creatures we can toy around with all we want. How did the moral committees allow this, but not a few gay people? Then a whole bunch of nothing follows as the X-Men are training once again, and as we have established, it's a waste of time when they can show all that in action. Then the bad guy displays his powers, which is simply teleporting around and stealing money whenever he wants to. As per usual with dumb plots, he tells the military where he's attacking next because that way the heroes can easily find him instead of having to use their brains. Xavier, like the evil mastermind he is, has enslaved FBI agents who inform him telepathically about mutant activities and then uses one of the thousands of different vehicles he has brainwashed the army into giving him. What an evil mastermind! So they encounter the Vanisher, who was stupid enough to tell them where he would be, and despite using their powers properly, he manages to steal military defense plans and blackmails the government into giving him money for not selling them to them evil communists. Isn't it strange how moral committees are fine with political propaganda but don't tolerate gays? Anyways, it was a far better fight than done with Magneto because it lasted for 2 whole pages instead of running away without putting up a fight. On the other hand, you can't call it a fight either because all he was trying to do is run away with the plans he wants to blackmail the government with by mentioning them evil communists. Eventually he runs away exactly like Magneto did, and this was the big defeat the cover was hyping you up for. He didn't beat them in a fight, he just got away with the secret plans that he will sell to them evil communists if they don't give him money. By the way, if that counts as a defeat, then Magneto running away after having caused so much damage to military equipment should also count as a defeat, but it magically doesn't. So how the heck do they defeat the Vanisher when he can teleport whenever and wherever he wants? Let me tell you how. Xavier looks at him and it's over, that's it, that's how they defeat the villain who was more capable than Magneto. The X-Men do nothing, as commanded in the cover, and Xavier looks at him and he gets amnesia. That's how them evil communists didn't get the plans either. This was terrible! Why do the X-Men need to train and fight when Xavier can defeat anyone just by looking at him? What's the point of all those wasted pages on training sessions when a crippled guy can defeat anyone without moving a muscle? Xavier is so broken he shouldn't even exist! But then again, how would the X-Men do anything without him constantly telling them what to do, giving them cars and airplanes for going where they have to, and being allowed to leave when they mistreat innocents and cause trouble in military bases? See how the story can't work without heavy doses of plot convenience. But wait, there is more! A bunch of mobsters joined the Vanisher because they thought they would never go to jail with him as their boss. Why would they think that? He only teleports away whenever there is trouble. How would his power keep them out of prison? By teleporting inside the prison for taking them out every time they are arrested? Whatever, they got defeated in a couple of pages filled with terrible puns. And then the army comes in to arrest everyone, but ignores Xavier and the X-Men because he brainwashed them to not pay attention. Then his lackeys congratulate their supreme overlord, who treats them like puppets for defeating the bad guy by using his brain. Yeah, that implies he did something smart for tricking him when he did no such thing. By the way, did you notice how none of them questions their leader for mind-wiping people so easily? How do they know he hasn't done the same thing to them? Nah, he's a good guy. He would never do something as horrible as making
them forget their own relatives and fellow students. There is no way Xavier would do such a thing and then thrall them into mindless puppets who would never question him.
He's a good guy. Anyways, the final text says they are fighting the greatest danger of all in the next issue, but we all know it's just vapid hype for fooling you into
buying the next one as well.
Seriously, who would want to check out another issue of this bullshit? But if it means anything, the third issue is actually the best one so far. So in case you still care to find out what an actually good conflict is all about, get hype! In the third issue, the X-Men fight the Blob, which the cover describes as one of the strangest super foes of all. He's not, he's another street-level nobody, with a dull power that simply makes him immovable. If he doesn't want to be moved, he doesn't move. His design is also non-existent, he's just a naked fat guy. On the good side, the heroes, whom the cover describes as having taken over America by storm, which is a lie, are irrelevant this time because they are fighting the bad guy with much more dynamic poses than in the first cover. And then there is Iceman, who is throwing a toy missile. Iceman, you're not good at this, please go back to your gay pole dancing. Also, no background. So again, we are given no context for where they are fighting or for what purpose. So the first pages are once again wasted on a useless training session, followed by all the X-Men simping over Marvel Girl. Even Iceman, although we know he's pretending. Even Xavier is all over her, although he shouldn't because he can simply brainwash her into becoming his mindless sex slave. But hey, let's pretend he can't do it, and that he's a good guy and not an evil mastermind. Anyways, in modern times, all this simping counts as either pathetic or sexual harassment. But back then it had to happen in every 60s comic, since it was better to be a simp than being gay. Imagine all the children who grew up reading this shit and assumed this is how they should be acting all the time. What can possibly go wrong if you behave like that all the time around women? So they find the Blob working as a circus freak and ask him to join the X-Men. He doesn't seem interested until they brace yourselves. Offer Marvel Girl as a sexual reward. Our heroes, people, treating women as sexual rewards. What can possibly go wrong if you grow up thinking like that? The next scene is about Stan Lee realizing he made Xavier way too powerful and nerfed his powers to a great extent. The Blob lied about joining the X-Men, he only wanted to know the whereabouts of their base so he can take over the place and have sex with Marvel Girl. Normally Xavier would have brainwashed him in an instant so he would forget the location, but now he magically can't. And it has nothing to do with the Blob's power, it doesn't dodge mental attacks. They just nerfed Xavier so the plot won't end right away. By the way, when you read the dialogue out of context, it sounds like Xavier wants from the Blob to be his mindless puppet, like the other X-Men. The Blob replies, "No, I don't want to be controlled like a puppet as you did with the others." And Xavier responds by commanding his minions to attack him so he can brainwash him into becoming another mindless drone. Nothing unsettlingly evil at all. They try to stop him from leaving, but they can't because that's his power. If he doesn't want to be moved, he doesn't move. He returns to the circus, and this is where things get really silly. He convinces the performers to attack the Academy for getting the technology inside, and they agree. No explanation provided for what would clowns and acrobats do with advanced technology, or why would they think they can overpower the ones who made Magneto to run away in a few seconds, who defeated the Vanisher just by looking at him, and who easily captured dozens of mobsters with machine guns. The only logical answer is the same as the one for Xavier. They nerfed the X-Men in general, so their accomplishments won't won't seem impressive anymore. Magneto is no longer the strongest supervillain of all, and Vanisher is no longer undefeatable. By the way, both these statements were made in the previous covers, it's not like I made them up. The very creators used them for making you buy the comic and then pretended they never happened. It's the same bullshit they are doing in manga and anime as well. Remember when there was only one Super Saiyan and he was special? Oh, and just like before, you can easily assume the Blob wants to stop the evil mastermind from taking over the world through mind control by taking away his evil technology. Anyways, the X-Men need to build a machine that allows Xavier to brainwash a group of people instead of a single target, something which wasn't an issue before. It was, again, done so a bunch of clowns can pose a threat and the plot won't end in a few seconds. Also, this machine they are building is not a smart solution, much less a better alternative to simply kicking the living shit out of a bunch of clowns. They just create a MacGuffin that didn't exist so far, was conveniently invented for giving Xavier a power-up just for this issue, and will never be used again. It's the same thing as those cars and airplanes they were using in previous issues. They popped into existence for conveniently transporting the heroes where they should be, and then disappeared forever from the story. No foreshadowing, no build-up, just lazy cop-outs for a problem to be fixed in a hurry. Only incompetent writers who don't give a shit about good storytelling would resort to this kind of crap, and for all I care, they can drop dead. Oh wait, Stanley's already dead. Well, that changes everything. I'm really sad. I'm so sad. Oh my god, Stanley was such an amazing writer. Oh, give me money because I care. After all that, the battle with a circus troupe happens, and as ridiculous as it looks, it is 10 times better than the previous ones. It lasted a third of all pages, and every single performer had a gimmick, meaning the fight was long and had variety. Plus there was personal investment, since the X-Men were not fighting a villain who had nothing to do with them, besides being a mutant who threatens America. They were defending themselves from looters who wanted to force themselves in their home and steal their property. It makes sense that they should defend themselves instead of letting a bunch of clowns to ruin their lives. Why would you let a bunch of clowns to burn your car, trash your home, steal everything you worked hard all your life, and then do nothing as they run away to do the same thing to the rest of the city? Anyways, the point here is that this conflict is a lot more direct, engaging, interesting, and relevant than some distant threat like villains who take over a military base or sell military plans to evil communists. It's also a conflict that the X-Men caused by assuming nobody would refuse to join them, so it was a twist of sorts for making them more careful in the future. Not every mutant will gladly want to coexist peacefully with the normies just because the X-Men asked him politely to do so. On the other hand, it makes them come off as very gullible, since they already saw other mutants and common humans abusing their powers for personal gain. Heck, they are abusing their powers all the time, and they're supposed to be the good guys. Why did they assume the Blob would gladly join them? Because they shamelessly gave him Marvel Girl as a sexual reward? Our heroes, people, so smart and selfless. This is why, in a possible rewrite of the X-Men storyline, the third issue should chronologically be the first. It would excuse why the X-Men and Xavier are way weaker, why normal people are not afraid of them, and why they are so naive. Magneto should have been a much later mission when they have leveled up enough from earlier missions. Basically, when that info dump happens in the first issue, the Blob should be right next to Marvel Girl for having sex with her. Now back to the plot, the way they stop the Blob is a bit smart. Although nothing can move him from where he stands, he cannot defy gravity. So they smash the floor he's standing on and he falls in. Not exactly rocket science, but it gave Xavier the time to complete his machine. Speaking of that MacGuffin, the battle ends again with Xavier using his evil mastermind powers for giving everyone amnesia. As part of the retcon they gave him in this issue, he cannot do it if the target's defenses are not down, meaning his powers became like in Pokemon. You cannot thrall the target into becoming your minion until you kick the living crap out of the Pokemon and its hit points are low. And thus the status quo is preserved and the day saved by making everyone not remembering it. Now Xavier is free to continue his evil plans. One positive thing is that there was teamwork during this fight. Previously Xavier could defeat anyone with a stare and teamwork meant nothing, since he didn't really need the X-Men for anything. This nerf made the fight more interesting, the same way Naruto was more interesting, while it was about tactics and teamwork instead of a Dragon Ball wannabe. See you next time, when that incompetent writer, whom I consider to be the best writer of all times because he's dead, give me money, brings back the once most powerful of all supervillains. In this issue, Magneto is back and he shrinks the X-Men. Oh wait, this doesn't happen, it's bullshit for fooling you to buying the comic. The actual point of the cover is the introduction of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which is stupid, since nobody would call himself evil. Magneto thinks he deserves to rule the world, he doesn't think he's evil. Anyways, we see the Brotherhood for the first time, and why is it called the Brotherhood when there is a woman in it? And why is she dressed in green? Scarlet Witch is dressed in red, hence the name. Did she use her powers to change the color? No, they probably did it so she won't seem like she's sprouting out of Magneto, who is also in red. Anyways, the introduction of the evil group of mutants is a plus, since each one of them has its own gimmick in a fight, instead of being the same one villain is using all the time. Plus, now Magneto doesn't have to talk to thin air when expositioning his evil plans. He now has to do it so that his minions can hear it. It's why in a possible remake, the first issue should be fused with this issue. With that said, this is one messed up team. Toad is totally gay for Magneto. Mastermind is a sexual predator the way he acts around the Scarlet Witch. Quicksilver is a sick bastard with a serious sister complex to the point he has no will of his own. And Scarlet Witch suffers from victim mentality, where she constantly obeys Magneto for helping her out in the past, even if it means being treated as a sexual reward. On paper, I like how all of them have flaws and are not one-dimensional evil, but on the other hand, what kind of a moral committee would approve of such a thing? What happened to the whole, "will you please think of the children"? They kept yapping about Batman and Robin being gay. Anyways, Mastermind creates the illusion of a Nazi army marching through the streets so that the whole nation will surrender without putting up a fight. Which is dumb because there should be at least a couple of shots fired by a few brave individuals. But then again, they are using the excuse of the Nazis taking over entire countries without a single shot fired. By the way, if it seems weird to see Magneto being fine with using such tactics when he's supposed to be a Jew who suffered in a concentration camp, the writer hadn't thought of that yet, and the backwards ass-spool of an explanation is that he became what he hated to the point of becoming a Nazi. Which is not a bad idea to explore, actually. This issue has the themes that made the X-Men so popular: racism, abuse of power, alienation for being different, wanting to fuck your own sister. Unfortunately, we are still in the 60s, it's still too early to expect any sort of meaningful exploration. The X-Men attack the palace and somehow defeat the actual Nazi army Magneto formed after he took over. Then what was the point of using a fake army in the beginning instead of a real one? Oh well, we get a long fight again, which is pretty cool for what it is. Unfortunately, Magneto is once again being a complete coward who doesn't want to face them head-on, despite being a super powerful mutant. He doesn't just flee though, he creates booby traps that can blow up the entire nation. How the hell did he found the materials and the time to build them is a different story, since everyone has infinite money in these comics. Just look how casually they form actual armies in a single panel. Oh well, what matters is Magneto actively attempting to kill the X-Men, and he doesn't give a shit about the population of a whole country he will kill in order to achieve that. It's something he wasn't doing in the first issue, and thus he comes off as far more merciless here. And I love how he says he's doing it in self-defense when he's responsible for the whole mess and he wants to kill mutants like him. It's that sort of silly reasoning that makes these stories fun. Anyways, Xavier gets hit by the blast of an explosion that makes him unable to use his powers, while Quicksilver defuses the bombs because his sister was very sad about killing innocent people. Not because he wanted it, he doesn't have free will. Beyond that, it was a decent issue. Although they wrapped up the takeover of the country way too soon, for the first time we have a cliffhanger, with consequences that lead directly to the next issue. Also, the tension is high because the X-Men can no longer rely on their leader to conveniently mind-wipe the enemy. So the next issue begins, and it starts in a light way with the parents of Marvel Girl coming to pay a visit. Normally Xavier would mind control them to see whatever he wants them to see, but in this case the X-Men have to bullshit their way through every minute and pretend being a normal academy. Kinda funny, but eventually filler. The actual plot begins when Magneto decides to get rid of the X-Men by finding their base. And he does that while being inside his base, which is a freaking space station. Don't ask how the hell he found the materials and the time to build it. He has infinite money. Which begs the question, why does he waste money on space stations and keeps trying to take over the world when he can simply buy it? How hard can it be when he's a Jew? They already own everything. Instead of that, he thought of a ridiculously convoluted plan that is extremely situational, and there is no way it would work if every single parameter doesn't work properly. If I simplify it so you can get it without making your head explode from the stupidity, it goes like this. Toad puts on a mask task and joins a sport tournament. Magneto assumes the judges won't see something wrong with his falsified documents. He then assumes the crowd will get angry with Toad for doing too well. He then assumes the X-Men will be watching the sport event on television and will decide to intervene, although they might refuse since Xavier is incapacitated. He then assumes they will get to the stadium in a few minutes without traffic or airport procedures slowing them down and save the disguised Toad before he gets lynched. He then assumes they will manage to get away without suspecting there is something familiar about Toad's superpower, since they cited just one issue ago. And he then assumes they will take him to their base, where he will somehow manage to inform Magneto of its location. All these assumptions essentially make his plan impossible to succeed. Unless you are a lazy writer who makes 60s comics for dumb kids. Seriously though, he could simply buy the whole planet with his due money and be done with it. Thanks to this ingenious plan, which I have no idea how it worked out, Magneto manages to capture Angel and begins to torture him for revealing the location of their base. Scarlet Witch is shocked to find out Magneto is willing to kill in order to get what he wants, because it's not like he was about to kill millions of people just one issue ago. Did she get amnesia or something? Meanwhile, the X-Men have captured Toad and they do want to know where is Magneto's base, but they don't have to torture him because he's so gay for Magneto, he gets into a trance and summons a shuttle that will take them to the asteroid. What a stupid cop-out. The writer didn't want to have the good guys resorting to torture, and with Xavier not able to mind control Toad, this lazy excuse is the best he could think for taking the X-Men to the asteroid. Predictably, they save Angel, and when Magneto corners them, Scarlet Witch and that Siscon Quicksilver help them escape because they are not bad people. And of course, Magneto is not going to punish them despite being betrayed constantly. He gets amnesia every time they backstab him. Thus, they manage to return to the academy where they find Xavier being completely fine. It was fake tension, he was trolling them the whole time, he had never lost his powers, he only wanted them to think and act for themselves. Which is bullshit, since he is still mind-controlling them the whole time. It's probably how Toad got in a trance and Scarlet Witch along with Magneto got amnesia. On top of that, just like Magneto, he assumed a whole bunch of stuff for this test to work out. And just like Magneto's plan, it wouldn't work with so many situational parameters. As if he knew all the traps in the asteroid wouldn't kill them, or that the Scarlet Witch would help them escape. It was all bullshit and worked out because it was written by a lazy writer who makes 60s comics for dumb kids. Oh, and let's completely ignore the fact that Angel got tortured for hours because Xavier wanted to troll him. Look at him laughing at you in the last panel, as if he is telling you, "You moron, did you expect something good out of a 60s comic?" Thus ends the story of the first issue with plot continuity, by ruining everything that was good about the cliffhanger of the previous issue. Boy, the X-Men really suck, don't they? If they were made today, they would get the axe in 10 chapters. The 6th issue is the first crossover story where a character of a different comic appears once and is then completely forgotten. That character is the Submariner, Marvel's Aquaman who doesn't talk to the fish and who isn't remotely popular. Like all men in 60s comics, his personality should be that of a simp, otherwise the parents will think he's gay. His only motivation is to impress women and hopefully that way they will agree to have sex with him. Then Magneto comes and wants him to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, something which doesn't make any sense because he's not a mutant. This can never happen. Magneto needs a reason for this simp to join his team and offers Scarlet Witch as a sexual award if he joins them. What an evil thing to do! I am sure the X-Men would never drop so low. Oh wait, that's exactly what they did with the Blob. The Siscon Quicksilver is obviously against this idea, since he wants to be the only one who is fucking his own sister. Scarlet Witch, always under Stockholm Syndrome, says it's perfectly fine if she's becoming everyone's little slut, since she has to thank the man who saved her life, and then made it completely miserable. The X-Men arrive to foil Magneto's plans again and capture Quicksilver. He gets ready to use a powerful magnet on them, which doesn't make any sense, since he could already control magnetism and do some fairly super powerful things without the need of a machine. Scarlet Witch starts whimpering again, saying the same shit about, "Oh Magneto, don't tell me you're willing to kill people!" As if that is not what he has been doing all this time. By the way, something went wrong with the coloring in the third panel and Magneto looks completely retarded. Like a true simp, Submariner turns against Magneto for treating a woman badly, smashes the machine, ends the alliance with him, and assumes Scarlet Witch will thank him with a blowjob. He then turns against the X-Men for attacking Quicksilver, and assumes he will get a titty fuck from Scarlet Witch. Unfortunately, the fight is stopped by Xavier, who, true to his role as an evil overlord, mind controls everyone into obeying him. What, did you expect something smart and exciting as a resolution? With that plot device constantly hijacking everyone's free will? He's such a manipulative asshole. He goes as far as calling everyone a pawn. But not his, no sir, he's a good guy. Magneto on that retarded panel is the one who is controlling them, and they believe him. The end. What a trash fire issue. Let's read more. So in issue 7 we get the introduction of Cerebro, the machine that finds other mutants. As you can imagine, it's another plot device for the X-Men to know where they can find the evil mutants, instead of having to look for them. Because up until now, they always had to rely on television and newspapers and brainwashed secret agents for giving them a hint, and then to randomly look for a mutant around the area Xavier is sensing something. That could take days. Well, not anymore, for this Dragon Radar for mutants is moving things along much faster and in whatever way the writer wants to. Meanwhile, the other X-Men are in a progressive coffee bar with terrible music, terrible dancing, terrible poetry, and everyone thinking they are amazing because they break the mold and subvert your expectations by having absolutely no quality standards. Basically, they all think like Magneto in that panel. These people are basically the modern anime community. They have food fetish, see flower symbolisms everywhere, create fads out of nothing, and consider art to be whatever impresses them at the moment. Even the X-Men of the 60s felt realistic. As for the plot of the issue, it's just Magneto making the Blob to remember everything, and by being a complete retard, he doesn't ask the Blob to show him where the base of the X-Men is. Instead of that, he provokes them in some warehouse where he's still being a retard, and forgets the Blob's power makes him immune to attacks. The X-Men survive an explosion by hiding behind their enemy. I don't get why the shrapnel wouldn't hurt them anyways, but then again the quality of the plot is of the same intelligence as Magneto right now. Once again, the most powerful supervillain in the world made his new ally to turn against him. He runs away defeated, and I am left to wonder, why am I still reading this trash fire? Because I was paid to do it. So in issue 8, Stan Lee realizes Iceman looked really lame as a snowman, and just like that he changes his appearance to the one most people remember him as. That's it, that's why he will look differently from here onwards. A quick change with no build-up and no fanfare to make it memorable. We are supposed to accept it and move along. Meanwhile, Beast is fed up with Homo sapiens treating him badly and out of nowhere decides to quit being an X-Man. Something which doesn't make any sense, since just one issue ago he was a local idol because of his progressive food fetish. This change also had no build-up and we are supposed to accept it and move along. Although we can't, because mutants are supposed to be constantly persecuted and Beast has seen what evil mutants are doing when they turn against humanity. He has been training under Xavier for years and should have been brainwashed to never think like that. Basically, this whole thing is just there for purposes of lazily written drama that came out of nowhere and won't matter by the next issue. So Beast abandons the X-Men and becomes a sellout, someone who cares only about the spectacle, the fame and the money. His wrestling career gets instantly crushed because, conveniently, there is another famous mutant wrestler who easily defeats him with the power of being untouchable, which is practically the exact same power as that of the Blob. They couldn't even think of a new power to give to the next enemy just one issue after the Blob came back. Also, the writer completely forgot how he established that the population hates it when an athlete does way better than the others, which is why they wanted to lynch Toad during the Olympic Games. Yet you don't see anyone complaining about this wrestler being overpowered to the point nobody can even touch him, much less defeat him. The writer went retarded Magneto. That mutant is also conveniently evil and causes trouble. The X-Men can't stop him because he can block everything, like the Blob, and Xavier is conveniently on a trip so they can't brainwash him, like the Blob, and be done with it. Beast conveniently changes his mind and returns to the X-Men, and also conveniently knows how to build a machine that can amplify the powers of a mutant. It's the exact same thing Xavier did back when the Blob attacked the Academy. He created a MacGuffin that works only in the story it is needed and is then forgotten forever. Rehashed plotline is rehashed. Just like that, Not Xavier uses the MacGuffin on Not Blob, which makes him unable to touch food and he is forced to surrender. And that's the end of this uncanny story, which is not only a rehash of the third issue, but also a retarded Magneto version of the beginning of Spider-Man. You know, he also wanted to be rich and famous through wrestling, but he didn't change his mind because an evil Spider-Man just happened to be already a wrestler, did he now? A Homo sapien killed his uncle, and he realized why with great power comes great responsibility. Did the beast lose anyone? Did he even use his great power for fixing the problem? No, he becomes an inventor out of nowhere, and then he forgets the MacGuffin he created, making this entire issue to be completely filler. Enough said. Issue number 9 is the second crossover, this time with the Avengers. Despite being heroes, the X-Men are not teaming up with them against a common enemy, they are fighting each other for a dumb reason. It all begins when Thor's hammer is telling them where to go and fight a bad guy. Not because the bad guy did something bad, not because he spoke to them, not because they know him, not even because they were looking for him. A magic hammer told them there is evil over there, go and stop it. What a lame plot convenience. It doesn't even work like that in other stories. They just used it this way for the sake of the Avengers going after someone they know nothing about. Meanwhile, the bad guy in question is in front of Xavier and has an amazing strategy that will protect him from his mind control. He has connected his heart with a nuclear bomb, so if he dies, there will be a devastating explosion. What an amazing plan! As long as Xavier doesn't kill this guy, then everything will be fine, which he never does. All he has to do is brainwash him into defusing the bomb, but for some reason the thought never crosses his mind. Instead of doing the obvious, he brainwashes the X-Men into fighting the Avengers. Do you know why? Because that way the Avengers won't kill the bad guy and the bomb won't explode. Although he can simply tell the Avengers not to kill him, therefore avoiding the fight. But if he did that reasonable thing, we wouldn't have the X-Men fighting the Avengers, which is what everyone expects to see in a crossover. And what a lame fight it was. These are not the 90s X-Men who were demigods in terms of power levels. They are rookies who stand no chance against the Earth's mightiest heroes. So it's not even a fight, they are bothering the Avengers just to stall time. And why do they have to stall time? So Xavier can brainwash the bad guy, something he could have done since the very beginning, and then he mind controls the Avengers into stopping the fight, something he also could have done since the very beginning. For some reason, mind controlling the bad guy gave him a heart attack which activates the timer of the bomb. How the hell that works, I don't know. So they have a few minutes to deactivate the mechanism of the bomb with a very risky and calculated I-beam. They make it seem like the situation is grim and the tiniest mistake can kill everyone, when they have the Avengers right next to them who can easily deal with the bomb. Thor, for example, could throw it to space where it could explode without worries. Iron Man could hack the program. Wasp could become tiny and go inside the machine for deactivating it much easier than the I-beam. But they don't do any of that, so we can have a fake tension. Thus, while the X-Men are struggling to save the planet, the Avengers leave without doing anything against the evil they came to stop. A nuclear bomb that is about to destroy the whole planet is right next to them, and Earth's mightiest heroes simply go home. They were in the story just for a quick one-sided fight and then fucked off. Anyways, eventually the bomb is defused and the day is saved. As for the bad guy who caused a crisis that almost killed the whole planet and was responsible for Xavier becoming a cripple in the past, he is punished by letting him go. I'm not joking, they just let him go. Which doesn't make any sense. Suppose that the realization that he lost is enough, but come on, at least put him in prison for almost killing everyone on the planet. Or at least ask him what his plan was all about. They don't even know why he did it or where he came from. And guess what? He doesn't become a good guy as thanks. He comes back later on and threatens the world with another doomsday device. All that shit could have been avoided if Xavier had brainwashed him into defusing the bomb, or asked the Avengers to help, or imprisoned the bad guy, or at least asked him about his plan. But no, we get none of that because the only reason this issue exists was for showing the X-Men fighting the Avengers for a couple of pages. They didn't think how the rest of the pages will play out in a way that makes sense. By the way, did you see how they drew Xavier in that panel to the left? Look at that heroic face. It's almost like they are telling us Xavier is the one and only bad guy in the whole show, and everyone else is fighting pointlessly for his amusement before letting everyone go away without any consequences, just for the heck of repeating the same bullshit whenever he wants to be entertained again. Moving to issue 10, which doesn't even have a plot. It's more like an infomercial about the Savage Land. The X-Men go there, they have a tour around the most important locations of it, and then the issue is over with nothing achieved. Not even the main heroes are doing something. A Tarzan knockoff was the real protagonist, while they remained passive the whole time. Basically, Marvel created this issue for the sole purpose of promoting a completely different comic. Which doesn't make any sense, because why the hell would you expect good promotion through the 60s X-Men? They suck. And then we got issue 11, which is a complete troll. As you noticed by now, most issues end with Xavier brainwashing the bad guy into submission. The same thing seemed to be happening here as well. A mutant named the Stranger appeared, Magneto tried to ally with him, then Xavier went there to mess with their free will. And here is the subversion. Xavier was completely powerless before the Stranger, because he was a super alien from a faraway planet. Although Magneto made another stupid mistake as usual, and ruined the chance to ally with him as he did with the Submariner and the Blob. This time it doesn't end with everyone going home like nothing happened, so the same crap can repeat next time with zero consequences, because Xavier couldn't brainwash him, get it? In this case, the Stranger leaves Earth with Magneto and Toad and takes them to a museum on his planet. This leads to the end of the first Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, as well as to Scarlet Witch, now free of her captor who had her stuck in Stockholm Syndrome, being free to join the Avengers. Oh, and Quicksilver followed her there and also became an Avenger, because he's a Siscon. So essentially, we achieved plot continuity and character development simply because Xavier, the real bad guy in the series, wasn't in control for once, and he couldn't repeat the same bullshit over and over with no consequences. Isn't it amazing how something as simple as not having mind control instantly makes any story better? In a previous video, some pointed out a mistake I made when I said the Submariner is not a mutant. It's easy to mix things up when he was never mentioned as being a mutant, and back then the term was ill-defined. In this panel, for example, the alarm of Cerebro goes off by sensing the Juggernaut getting closer. This shouldn't be possible since it only detects mutants, and the Juggernaut is not a mutant. Just like Thor's hammer in a previous issue, Cerebro is a plot device for making things easier by pointing out the whereabouts of a bad guy. It doesn't make any sense beyond that function. This issue is important as far as lore is concerned because we are told the backdrop of Xavier. You know, the only character that matters because the rest are his mindless puppets. The problem is Xavier describes his past to us as the Juggernaut is attacking them. You literally see the X-Men standing still and listening to their mentor expositioning his backdrop while the Academy gets trashed. It's a completely inappropriate moment for an info dump, and yet another example of bad writing. By the way, throughout the issue we don't see the Juggernaut. He is deliberately kept hidden from the reader for hyping up his revelation. And when it finally happens, it's a small panel that makes him look stupid and insignificant. Like any establishing shot, he should have gotten a full page, just for pointing out his importance and intimidation. Stuff that Stan Lee didn't know much about. As for the way they defeat him, it's a rush job. Xavier can't brainwash the Juggernaut while his helmet is on, and he's too powerful for his puppets to do it on their own. So he brainwashes the superheroes in his area to come and fight this guy until his helmet goes off. It counts as a crossover since we see the Daredevil in the Fantastic Four, but it's done in a very rushed way and it ends in the usual way of Xavier brainwashing everyone to forget this battle from ever happening. After all the build-up of the Juggernaut constantly trashing the Academy and the X-Men and getting an important flashback that is supposed to lead to character development and plot progression, the whole thing is wrapped up in a hurry and nobody remembers it even happened. Consequences and plot continuity, what is that? And let's completely ignore half of the Academy being in ruins. Nobody's going to ask how the heck that happened. Even if they don't remember it got attacked. What a shit show! Stan Lee sucks! And then we actually move to a good arc for a change. Not a great one, mind you, but it's definitely far better compared to the other trash so far. The Homo sapiens finally start being worried about the mutants and make a fuss about it. Something they should have done since the beginning of the comic when a single mutant took over a military base, but didn't because Xavier was brainwashing everyone to forget or ignore all the shit that is going on around them. All of a sudden his powers get nerfed again and he can no longer control everyone as he likes. Which is wonderful because this way we can finally get a worthwhile conflict. Mutants so far weren't getting any backlash besides a few mobs here and there. From this point on, the population is worried about them the same way they are about them evil communists and them satanic Nazis. Basically, this is where the real story of the X-Men begins, with the previous issues being the prologue. This is an Attack on Titan and One Piece in-joke. Another joke is the hypocrisy on this page. Xavier comments that the fear against mutants is illogical since nobody abuses his power to subdue the Homo sapiens. Yes, none of the mutants the X-Men fought so far was doing that. Not even the X-Men when they were pushing around the normies whenever they saw fit. And let's not overlook Xavier complaining about the supposed lie of a mutant using his psychic powers for enslaving humanity. You know, the thing he's doing since the beginning of the comic. Anyways, we get the introduction of the Sentinels here, who eventually become a staple of the comic and are constantly used to fight mutants with all sorts of weaponry. Unfortunately, exactly as it happened with the Juggernaut, their establishing shot is a small panel that makes them look pathetic. They just push a curtain and walk forward? What is this shit? How is this supposed to be intimidating? Also, their initial design was awful. They were small with huge ugly heads, yuck! The designs improved a lot in the future, but for the time being, we have to tolerate Stan Lee's lack of engaging paneling. We also need to tolerate his crappy storytelling, since in the classic fashion of stories with AI, the robots turn against their masters and plan to take over the world! This is where the themes stop having any gravity, since it's no longer about mutants getting discriminated anymore. It's about fighting big bad robots that want to take over the world! The situation became black and white, since you are never made to question if the mutants are evil or if the robots do actually good by wanting to control humanity. The X-Men fight the Sentinels not because they are heroes, but because they have to, regardless of their political views or how much they abuse their powers. The resolution to the problem is also very lazy. Although the Sentinels were too powerful for the X-Men to defeat in battle, and despite Xavier being unable to mind control them because they are not humans, out of nowhere and by complete chance, they find a crystal that conveniently deactivates them. It was never explained and was never used again. It was just another plot device for ending the conflict in a hurry. Lame! There is also the creator of the robots who realizes his mistake and sacrifices his life for destroying the robot base. This is supposed to be seen as tragic and even as a cautionary tale of abusing power, but like everything else it's too much on the nose. The creator was able to destroy the base anytime he wanted, but for several issues he was just helping the Sentinels in their plans. Changing his mind in the last pages came out of nowhere. Nobody convinced him to do it, and he saw nothing that would make him rethink something he didn't know for dozens of pages. Therefore, it's another sloppy way for Stan Lee to end the story in a hurry, because he sucks at storytelling. Excelsior! In the next story, the cartoonists are learning from their mistakes. Slowly, but they are learning. Someone is attacking the X-Men from the shadows. We never see his face exactly as we did in with Juggernaut for hyping the reveal. And when the reveal happens, ta-da! It's Magneto with a full page. Not a tiny panel as they did with the Juggernaut. That's how you do an exciting reveal. Unfortunately, the rest of the story is complete garbage, this time more than usually. If you remember, the Stranger had taken Magneto on a faraway planet from where he shouldn't be able to return. Well, he did return. Quite easily, actually. He went inside a spaceship that was just conveniently standing next to him and came back just like that. And when he did, he just magically knew where the headquarters of the X-Men are, something he didn't know all this time. And then he uses magnetism for building a machine that creates mutants? which doesn't make any sense since magnetism is not enough to wish into existence whatever you like. Mutants are not mass-produced robots but real people, and if Magneto could do such a thing all this time, he wouldn't be trying to recruit more members into the Brotherhood. Furthermore, when he defeats the X-Men, he doesn't simply kill them, he instead puts them in a balloon and sends them to space where they can suffocate, which is completely convoluted for no reason, and the outcome would be the same as simply shooting them to death. As you can imagine, the X-Men escape and Xavier uses his psychic powers for summoning the Stranger, for taking back Magneto. And just like that, the story ends. Holy shit, this was more retarded than usually. In the next story, we get even more of Xavier's backdrop and zero for everyone else again, since he's the only one who matters all this time. Anyways, we get another flashback that shows how that villain from the Avengers crossover smashed his legs and made him a cripple. It's an actually important detail as far as the lore is concerned, but it's also something that could have been easily shown in that previous arc, instead of getting this unnecessary sequel of it, because the plot is essentially the same, only this time the villain bothers to explain his plan. Xavier comes off like a complete moron for letting this exact villain to live in the previous story without a punishment, or at least without finding out what his plan was. We find out in this arc, but that is not an excuse, since the whole world is facing another apocalypse by a villain that should be in prison. As for the big reveal, the villain is an alien agent of an empire that plans to take over the world with robots after the collapse of civilization. What that means is that there is now another faction that would benefit from Homo sapiens and mutants destroying each other so it can take over. It's also something that wouldn't be that much of a threat if Xavier wasn't stupid. Anyways, the aliens' plan gets sabotaged again when the X-Men trick the robot guardians of the Doomsday device into destroying each other. Another anticlimactic ending to an otherwise interesting concept. After that event comes a series of really forgettable arcs. Whatever happens in them doesn't have interesting themes or villains, and even their plots are slight variations of stuff that have already happened before. That's right, the alien agent that comes back and repeats the same plot is not a standalone incident. Everyone comes back, everyone repeats the exact same plot, and nothing actually changes in any of those stories, because they are essentially worthless filler and not worth the paper they were printed on. You can pretend they never happened and you won't miss a thing. So let's skip them and get to the next interesting event. There's this evil organization of mutants, which is not the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. It's a different one, because even that has to be repeated without any reason. So this organization gathers several earlier enemies to fight the X-Men at the same time. That was actually kinda fun, since it gives continuity and a bit of a payoff for all those shitty stories you had to suffer through. This doesn't mean that the plot is amazing all of a sudden, since it's still fairly awful. None of them should be able to fight after losing their memories or their powers in previous encounters. But hey, you can just pretend they got their mojo back from the leader of the evil organization and enjoy the mindless action that follows. And boy, is there a lot of mindless action. The X-Men run all over the world, kicking the living shit out of military officers in bases that have bombs about to explode. That's right, not one bomb in one base set there by one villain, but several bombs in several bases by several villains, and it's all done for preventing World War III if the countries blame each other for the sabotage. As if that wasn't enough, the evil mutants eventually find out their leader plans to kill even them during the chaos, so they turn against him and there is an all-out chaos in the ranks of the organization. This is where you just sit back and enjoy the cheese. It's how every story should be like. Massive fights, high stakes and several twists. Speaking of twists, the leader of the evil organization is revealed to be a freaking alien octopus that wanted to conquer Earth by causing a nuclear war. And if you are paying attention, you will notice it's from the same star system as that alien empire from the previous arc, which also wanted to take over the world in a similar way. Since everything needs to constantly repeat in this stupid comic, with a bit of a headcanon, the octopus is another agent of the same group of bad aliens, so even that story ends up being connected to this arc. It's basically one glorious crossover of every arc so far, and why for the first time I actually enjoyed a few X-Men issues, even though it's still nonsense and not a highlight in the timeline of the X-Men. I just love the scale of the whole thing and how it brings together most of the shit you were tolerating all this time. See people, this is how by having faith something can get better. And it only took about 5 years. The following stories of the X-Men kept on being boring bullshit with nothing new worth going over. The only indirectly important event was the death of Xavier, and the cover which insists several times that it is not a lie and that he is really dead, only to be proven he's not. It was another troll that led nowhere. Supposed he wanted to fake his death for stopping an alien invasion, but when the time came to do it, there was no actual reason given for why he had to make them think he was dead. He just brainwashed a bunch of psychics to mentally attack the aliens so they will go away. Why did he have to pretend being dead for that? It was all bullshit. While he was absent, the rest of the X-Men were left alone to deal with new threats without Xavier conveniently brainwashing the bad guys into forgetting the whole thing. You would think this means the missions will be far more dangerous, and yet they weren't. They introduced Polaris, the all-powerful daughter of Magneto and future Empress of all mutants, before telling you it was all a lie and she's not his daughter nor she's all-powerful. The whole storyline ended up being a troll that led nowhere. Then they introduced Havoc, who is the brother of Cyclops, and who totally did not exist in any of the flashbacks or was mentioned up until now. They make a big fuss about him not being able to control his mutant powers, and that he will cause a major disaster that can threaten the world. And then he wears a suit that contains his powers, and this plotline also went nowhere. See, none of the missions were more exciting just because Xavier wasn't there. There was an attempt to flesh out every X-Man, meaning to give them backdrop as well as more flair and personality. It was something that was lacking all these years because Xavier was constantly stealing the spotlight. Again, you would think that now everyone will finally be interesting thanks to all that, and they weren't. None of them had an interesting story to tell because none of them had something important going on in their past. They were just average people who one day became mutants and joined Xavier's school. Taking Xavier out, the only person who had stuff happening in his past, ended up making them more boring than they were already. It's the main reason they eventually brought him back. The comic book relaunched some years later with a far better roster of characters, but I'm not gonna talk about that in this video. I will instead give you my rewrite of the X-Men thus far, for making them far more interesting without messing up the canon too much. So as I had mentioned in a previous video, the first issue should combine with the third, which was about the Blob, a low threat level mutant who would show right away that not all mutants want to live peacefully with a Homo sapiens. The Blob had kinda realized there was mind control at play, and his words about not wanting to be a puppet of Xavier would have an effect on Beast, the first to realize he's being mind controlled. The events from issues 7 and 8, where he is treated like a monkey by the local population, would also be the cause of him leaving the X-Men for finding a cure that would turn him to a normal human. The scene where he messes around with the formula he was preparing is not shown in the main series. It's in a mini-comic published during the discontinuation, but it is otherwise canon and a much better motivation to come back to the X-Men after he's chased around by criminals who want to steal his formula. He prefers to drink it than hand it over, which makes him the furry we all know. He realizes there are good and bad people in every species, so instead of trying to become something he is not, he's better off doing the best he can in the species he is part of. This is a much better character arc than that bullshit about becoming a wrestler and inventing a machine that amplifies mutant powers, only to forget all about it. Then comes the mission where the X-Men have to stop Magneto, who has taken over a country and its military bases. It's a combo of what happened in issues 1 and 4. Cyclops, after seeing Beast getting fed up with being mind-controlled, requests from Xavier to not brainwash anyone in the mission and to instead trust his students to manage without his constant interference. This is a much more legit reason to let them act on their own than trolling them to think he lost his powers and then laughing about it as if nothing bad had happened to poor Angel. Anyways, Cyclops becomes the leader of the team, and we will see how stressful it can get when a lot are at stake. He makes a few rookie mistakes, which lead to the capture and torture of Angel by Magneto, just like in issue 5. He will reveal the headquarters of the X-Men, and Magneto will go there to open the door to Angel's parents as he did in issue 17. How ironic is this? Opening the door to the parents of the person he was torturing. Basically, the torture will not be scrubbed off like it didn't matter. It will teach Cyclops the penalty for making mistakes. It will give Angel PTSD, and Magneto will find out where the headquarters are, instead of magically learning where they are without an explanation. If you remember, the X-Men defeated Magneto and his Brotherhood in just one issue, which doesn't make any sense in terms of power scaling. They were newbies and Magneto was super powerful, plus he had an army of Nazi soldiers and a bunch of powerful mutants and dozens of weapons of mass destruction. How the shit could the rookies defeat such a force so easily? They obviously couldn't. Thus it makes more sense if they failed in that mission, and the ones who stop Magneto are the Sentinels from issue 14. Instead of instantly turning against humanity, they actually prove how capable they are by defeating Magneto and his army. And the general population will be in support of them just to make it more ironic. You know, handing over your liberties so you can feel safe. The Sentinels still attempt to conquer humanity, not because of some error in the program, but because it's a plan by that alien agent from issue 9. Instead of getting a lame crossover with the Avengers and defusing a bomb that came out of nowhere, the alien agent's plan was to give humanity the technology to build the Sentinels, which he will then use to conquer it. It's a lot more sadistic and interesting that way. So, how do they stop the plan of this agent without resorting to Xavier just brainwashing him like he always does? Enter the Juggernaut from issue 12! He will not be brainwashed like the rest of them. He will be lured by Xavier in the agent's base, trashing the place and the robots he needed for taking over the world in issue 21. It's more tactical that way. Since the Mutant Master from issue 37 was from the same star system as the alien agent, he can very well be the leader of the same organization that was planning world domination since the beginning of the comic. He would be the final boss behind everything, escalating the hatred between humans and mutants so he can take over during the chaos. And just for making it easier to move to the second team of the X-Men later on, let's make him as strong as the Stranger from issue 11, a being so powerful he captured Magneto like he was nothing. The Mutant Master will easily capture the original team of X-Men for his menagerie, and he will place them in his prison island of Krakoa. I never mentioned that name so far, because it doesn't exist yet. It's where the second team of X-Men goes later on to save the first team. This way we get a smoother transition to the second team of heroes. Do they magically become more powerful than the Mutant Master? No, not even close. He will be away for some reason, and it will require the power of Phoenix much later for actually stopping him. And that's it, that's the end, for now. Notice how despite the rearrangement I made, I didn't use all the events. The original run of X-Men lasted 66 issues, and the highlights worth mentioning were less than a third of the whole run. It gets to show you how boring the comic was as a whole, and why it needed to be rejuvenated somehow. That is what happened a few years later, and turned the X-Men into the best superhero comic for decades. In 1975, the first giant-size X-Men comic became the soft reboot that this franchise desperately needed. The plot goes back to the basics, introducing new heroes who this time don't suck. It doesn't begin with a bunch of clowns and an old guy in a mansion. It spends time introducing each one of them by having Xavier traveling around the world looking for suitable replacements. So we get some insight to who they are and what they are like before they jump to action. They are not a blank slate of the first team. With that said, the introduction is not exactly elaborate. Half of them were only given a few panels because you are supposed to know about them from earlier issues. Something they make sure to mention in footnotes so you will consume product and be excited for more products. So yes, there is an introduction, but it's not the best introduction. It's just better than the nothing we got with the first team. The first mission is to save the first team after they got captured by a sentient island. That's where you get to see what each one of them can do with his powers without being a training session, because oh boy did the first team waste a lot of time displaying its powers in tensionless training rooms. Getting attacked by all sorts of weird stuff during a mission has the same effect and doesn't feel like a waste of time. The actual rescue mission wasn't something special to go over. They just used teamwork to shoo away the island. But it wasn't the type of teamwork that had duration. Since they constantly argue among them, they want to leave, they refuse to cooperate, one of them even gets himself killed, and in general they are in no shape to go on missions. Now normally this is where Xavier would just brainwash them into acting however he wants them to act, but the new writer had the bright idea to retcon how much he can control. Thanks to that, every X-Man is allowed to think for himself. He can have his own character arc, and not everything can be waved away by Xavier's plot reset bullshit. In fact, even Xavier gets his own arc. He has visions of something weird going on in space, and it's approaching Earth. He has no control over it. He cannot wave it away as he did so far, and it looks so damn awesome. Although it is not the first alien threat the X-Men face, it's by far the most epic one, since it isn't about a single alien doing some silly things on Earth. This is Star Wars in all its glory, and it's fantastic. Also, it's a mystery bait, you have no idea what's going on, and the story arc is not resolved in a couple of issues at the most. It keeps things hidden from you and reveals them slowly, motivating you to get the next issue. That's what made this comic book so successful. It wasn't the silly adventures of the 60s, and it wasn't the woke garbage we get today. It was multi-issue storylines with epic action, high stakes, character arcs, and constant thrill to find out what happens next. The highlight of 1976 was Jane Grey gaining the Phoenix Force. This was done to spice up her personality since, let's face it, she was very blonde and only existed so all the men, even Iceman, will simp for her so nobody will think they are gay. Once that stopped being an issue, she needed a reason to exist in the team, and the best thing the writer could come up with was making her a space hero. The X-Men were always an Earthbound team, they weren't suited for space adventures, so by giving her this power-up, they managed to make her more interesting, and the team could now battle more powerful enemies like the Stranger. The basic idea was fine, but the execution left a lot to be desired. Jane got the power by sacrificing herself. They were falling from space, she went outside to shield her team, and was supposed to have died when they crash landed. Instead of that, she comes out of the sea with a level up that made her stronger than everybody else. Really, instead of dying you get a power up, It was a Dragon Ball type of situation, where everything becomes about power, including character development. Not the best thing you could have done in a story that was originally being held back by broken powers. If the soft reboot managed to improve characterization by nerfing Xavier, why do you undo this improvement by introducing another broken superpower? Anyways, this wasn't an issue during the highlight of 1977, which was an amazing action flick where the X-Men go to space to save an alien princess, they meet space pirates whose leader is the father of Cyclops, thus even he gets a story arc, then they fight an Imperial Guard of a galactic empire, and they prevent the end of the universe by stopping the activation of a powerful artifact, woohoo! Also, somewhere in here Xavier falls in love with the alien princess, so even he gets a character arc. Peak fiction, right here! You keep wondering why I don't care about modern anime, this is the reason. This is what they made in the 70s and I got to see it animated in the 90s. Why would I give a shit about shows that are just simps and underage girls in some high school? Anyways, once this amazing event was over, the next 2 years were very lukewarm. The only thing that happened was Beast coming back to the team, now as a blue fairy, and Apocalypse being introduced as the next big threat. There was room for tension and high stakes, but most of it was being slapped away by Jane and her stupidly broken Phoenix power. She was so strong everything felt easy, so in 1980 the writers decided to make her evil. A bad guy mind-controlled her, she lost control and turned into Dark Phoenix, the destroyer of worlds. It was a very dramatic event since it came down to having to kill her instead of someone removing her powers and then acting like everything was okay. It was a big highlight in the storyline, since it ended with the apparent permanent death of one of the original members, after she had become Cyclops' girlfriend and murdered billions of innocent people. It was a case of, with great power comes great responsibility, something Jane couldn't handle, and the result was not a happy ending. Peak fiction! If only she had stayed dead and they didn't undo the whole thing later on, because nobody can stay dead in these comics. Not long after Jane's death, the next highlight strikes with Days of Future Past in 1981. For a very long time I thought it was inspired by the Terminator movie, but since it came out before that movie, it was probably the other way around. So this story is the first canon what if, where you see what would have happened if the bad guys had won. In this case it's the Sentinels, and the answer is a dystopia where mankind is enslaved to the machines because they all have the mutant gene. It was a super exciting event because it was the first time the bad guys had won and most of the good guys had been killed. Now obviously after seeing the same premise so many times since then, you come to realize it's just for shock, since when you can time travel to the past to undo negative consequences, nothing remains of all the evil things the bad guys have achieved. If there is a way to time reset any event you like, effectively retconning anything you don't like out of the continuity, there is no real gravity in anything the characters can do, since it can be undone at any moment. Later on they even retcon time travel to be the multiverse excuse so there can be a dimension with every possible outcome out there. On one hand it doesn't erase a timeline, it's always there, while at the same time it's stripping individuality and agency from the characters, since there is an infinite number of them out there doing an infinite different things. It doesn't matter what they do or if they die, someone can replace them and life goes on. But I am pretty sure very few cared about that back then, and this event made the X-Men so popular, the comic could continue doing the same crap without anyone noticing it. The main appeal was of course the character arcs that were given to every hero, usually based on a conflict that couldn't be punched into submission, and Xavier couldn't mind control it to go away, with every X-Man having his own side story, sprinkled among random adventures. It was keeping the audience engaged for years, even if the actual events weren't that important in the long run. With that said, Marvel Comics have the bad habit of undoing most events that seem to be going somewhere. The writer changes, the trends no longer support what is going on, so there are going to be retcons that undo events that were building up for years. Most of these story arcs that kept the readers engaged are eventually proven to be pointless, because they don't lead anywhere. The reason I am saying all that is because up until Days of Future Past, you weren't getting that many excuses for retcons. When the Inferno event happened in 1989, everything became harder to follow. I love Inferno for what is going on in it, but not for what happens to the characters. So, in a nutshell, Mr. Sinister creates a clone of Jane and has her seducing Cyclops, which says a lot about how shallow his attraction to Jane was in the first place if all he cares about is her looks. So he will knock her up and give birth to a superior mutant. Meanwhile, the original Jane comes back by retconning the one who died being a clone. Again, the clone excuse. Although this version doesn't have the Phoenix Force, she can still take it back from Rachel, who is her future child from the alternative timeline of Days of Future Past. Which means you can kill anyone you like there, it doesn't matter. And who, by the way, is not even the child the other clone gave birth to. That's an entirely different child. So when Jane comes back, instead of staying dead as she should have, Cyclops abandons the clone and goes back to the original, which says a lot about how shallow he is, blah blah blah. Despite the former being left alone to raise his child, what an asshole! So the clone gets pissy about it, makes a deal with the devil, and does a whole bunch of psionic and demonic shit that ends up with her death by the Phoenix Force. In effect, they killed Jane so there won't be an easy way to fix every problem, and then they resurrected her and gave her back the very power they didn't want in the plot because it was broken. So what was the freaking point of her death? You ruined the whole point of the Dark Phoenix saga, and you replaced it with clones of any character you kill just for shock, while the original is still alive and well and can return whenever you feel like it. This is not good writing, and it ruins the character drama of any story. The next big event was heavily based on that baby the clone gave birth to. A villain named Strife inflicted it with a powerful virus that had no cure at the time. So the X-Men hatched this ridiculous plan to send the baby in the far future, where a cure is possible, and it gets to be raised by clones of Cyclops and Jane. While in the future they made another freaking clone of the baby, in case the original dies and that baby became Strife, the villain who went back in time to inflict the baby with the virus. So yeah, we have a weird time loop going on here. As for the original baby, it grew up to be Cable, one of the most badass characters at the time, who went back in time to stop Strife. Time travel shenanigans. Now, how the shit does any of that matter in the long run if it's just a time loop for the sake of getting a character and his evil clone in the present? Well, him coming back in time messed up with the timeline again, the same way it got messed up during the events of Days of Future Past. A character named Bishop came from another alternative future, not the one Cable came from, a different one, to warn the X-Men about another dystopian future where the mutants are living in concentration camps. So yes, even without the Sentinels taking over, the mutants still get to be treated horribly. This will keep on happening for a few more times until the roles flip, and it's going to be the mutants who enslave the Homo sapiens. The future is fucked no matter what happens. So, how do they stop this second alternative timeline? Why, with the third alternative timeline, where Xavier gets assassinated, when he normally shouldn't have, and without him around to ease the tensions, Apocalypse begins a Holocaust. Like all future dystopias, it's very cool because the bad guys have won and the good guys no longer have plot armor. They can be killed at any moment. And like all such events, time travel is once again the way through which they conveniently preserve the status quo. Very cool to read, while at the same time very disappointing with how they wrap things up. And sure, some of the characters from that timeline end up on present time, the same way Rachel ended up on present time from Days of Future Past. Some things carry over, but not nearly enough as there could have been. So what happens now that they stop the third alternative timeline? They have to deal with the cause of the second alternative timeline. By not assassinating Xavier, his dark side takes over and becomes Onslaught. This event was huge at the time, since it was crossing over with every other heroic team of Marvel. At the same time, it was artificial. It happened for the sake of discontinuing several comics that weren't selling as much at the period when the comic book crash happened in the real world, because of the oversaturation of comics and distribution shenanigans. So although the actual event is cool and the final battle is awesome, if you break it down, you see how it was slapped on as an excuse to mitigate the damage in real life than being properly introduced in the storyline. It also makes Xavier overpowered once again. The main improvement of the soft reboot was not letting Xavier being overpowered. And here they are breaking it for the sake of the plot to happen however they wanted. And that is why for most readers this is the point where most superheroic comic books decline and become a pile of shit. Before I mention what happens after in 1996, I need to remind everyone of the 90s X-Men cartoon, which did a fantastic job of adapting the best parts of 4 decades of comics in a few dozen episodes. It took out the chaff and was showing you something important all the time. So those of you who don't care about reading several hundreds of comics, you can just watch the cartoon. It has some of the strongest plot continuity, and because the plots were already written, all the animators had to do was sticking to the best parts. Obviously, they couldn't be too graphical about it. They had to tone down the violence and the sexy parts so they could show it on children's television, but beyond that, it's the best alternative to reading the actual comics. And the theme song kicks ass! With that said, the cartoon stopped around the time when the comic was at the Onslaught event. Aside from how it had cut on to the source material, thus it couldn't maintain the fast pacing and keep focusing only on the highlights, it also couldn't show any of the stuff going on in current comics. They were largely not kid-friendly anymore. They were violent, depressing, and didn't have that much epic action anymore. Anyways, all of the highlights between the late 90s and the mid 2000s were about torture. The X-Men were constantly being tormented by their enemies, not for some plot development, but for being edgy. Nothing good came out of those scenes, not even any significant character development. It was just torture for the sake of edgy entertainment. And yes, I joked about the time when Magneto tortured Angel in the 60s, but that was one issue, and it ended with Xavier laughing it off as a joke. The same way he was doing for everything during that time. They couldn't repeat it here, since now Xavier is officially a bad guy since he created Onslaught. He couldn't hide the fact that he does a lot of evil shit and then brainwashes everyone to forget it. The cat is out of the bag. Thus, all you were getting for a whole decade after Onslaught was the mutants getting tormented again and again and again, nobody being able to joke about it, much less use his powers to undo the whole event. In a way, all this misery is excused in story because based on what Bishop said about his future, the Onslaught incident made everyone to hate the mutants, turn against them, and eventually gather them up in concentration camps. But this doesn't excuse the comics not being fun to read anymore. There isn't a single fight I liked during this period, because the stories were no longer action adventures, they were misery porn. And nobody was reading the X-Men for misery porn, they were reading them for the action adventures with lots of character drama sprinkled in. These things no longer exist. The action is shit, the character drama constantly resets, and they torture the main heroes all the time for the sake of coming off as edgy. This entire mess culminates to the House of M, where Scarlet Witch goes nuts and creates a reality where the mutants are in charge. Now this event is essentially escapism and revenge porn, since the mutants go to the offense and get everything they want. But they didn't do it in an in-story way, it's reality warping bullshit. It doesn't have any actual build-up, it's just someone going nuts and changing reality. It's cheap, lazy, and worst of them all, another artificially created event. Just like with Onslaught, the only reason they created this whole situation was for discontinuing any comic title that wasn't selling. There were so many mutants at this point and almost nobody was buying their titles, so this event was an excuse to end those stories by taking away the mutant powers. Meaning the actual House of M event didn't matter one bit. It was a short-lived dream where every mutant gets his wish granted. Once that was over, most mutants were no longer mutants, and the few who still were ran away in some fortified island so the persecutions would somewhat stop. So essentially it was a big middle finger to the future Bishop was preparing them for. No mutants, no need for concentration camps, all because of reality warping bullshit. This event is followed by a 5-year-long arc called the Messiah Complex, which again is not amazing as it is thematically strong. It's about a new mutant named Hope that some think she is the savior of mutants and some others think she is the destroyer. They went all religious in this one, making Hope to be Jesus or perhaps the Antichrist. Cable decides to mimic his story and takes Hope in a different time period so she can grow up away from a time where she would die. Bishop chases after him because he thinks she's just going to go nuts and bring about his future. Can you blame him after what happened with Dark Phoenix, and then with Onslaught, and then with the Scarlet Witch? He knew broken powers are bullshit, so he chases them around in different time periods as Hope slowly grows up, while in present time, the fortress of the last remaining mutants is under siege. Now this was kind of cool, since they literally open a portal to the alternative timeline of Days of Future Past, and they bring in an army of advanced sentinels to destroy the fortress. Finally, something epic in scope once again! Too bad it ended with Hope returning to the present and using her broken powers to just smack the bad guys away in an anticlimactic way. She even undoes the reality warping bullshit of Scarlet Witch, and now every mutant gets his powers back! Hey, what the shit? What was the point of taking them away if you're going to bring them back? I'll tell you why. They wanted to publish more comic book titles again, and for that they needed more mutants. Thus, as a whole, it was full of cool ideas, but the execution was as lazy as it gets. Reality warp this, reality warp that, nothing matters! And then we got to the 2010s, where Marvel became complete shit. The new future that Hope created is not hopeful at all. Everybody becomes gay. Everybody dies every year, but it doesn't matter, since death stops being an issue because they create a machine that resurrects you whenever you die. They constantly bring in the same heroes from other time periods, like the original X-Men from the 60s, which nobody liked, and Old Man Logan from the far future, which everybody liked. And they don't have story arcs like Cable and Bishop, who also came from different time periods. They just bring them in for the sake of it. And now we are stuck in this dreadful House of X, where the X-Men are a bunch of obnoxious SJWs that spend their time propagating the extermination of straight white men and having fashion exhibits. There is no ongoing plot anymore, there is no major threat, there is no action, there is nothing. It's just the self-insert fanfictions of queers. Thus, once again it is proven why anything that is modern is cancer. Look what they did to the X-Men! How can I be hopeful that a new cartoon is not going to be woke garbage? Only time will tell, and hopefully it's not going to be reality warped out of existence. And with that, this project is finally completed.